please be seated. Thank you very much. Our first speaker today is Stubbs. Pretty much everyone here knows him. He's a Las Vegas-based constitutional lawyer known for suing police officers that violate our civil rights. He's even been arrested himself for refusing to leave his client's side when police ordered him to leave so that they could question his client without him there. He is also the proud son of a Marine Corps captain. So, without any further ado, I'd like everybody to give a round of applause and listen to Mr. Stubbs.
You can just imagine, okay? You're a farmer, or you're a blacksmith, or you have some kind of a trade, and you came over to the Americas really because you wanted to be able to practice your religion the way that you wanted to. But the English, they're here, the redcoats, and their laws are a little different. They can stop you and search you at any time. They can take over your house. They can take anything in their house that they want, and they can do anything they want. They can take your sons and put them on commissioned ships. They can force you to testify against yourself and question you, and you had no right to say no. And some patriots decided that they weren't going to take that anymore. And after the war, and after we won, the states got together and they tried to form a constitution, so it's the United States of America. And the state said, there's no way in hell we are signing this unless you include some amendments that we call the Bill of Rights. And today we're going to be talking a lot about the Bill of Rights. Today I'm actually charged with talking about the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. I'm going to touch on one small thing on the First Amendment, but this is what makes our country different than any other. This is what blazed the trail for freedom throughout the entire world. Before this Bill of Rights, there was nothing. There was the Magna Carta, not even close. There was nothing like it on this earth. Nothing like it. And our country is amazing. Now, keep in mind, this is not a comprehensive class on the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. I'm talking to you about certain things that you can use in order for you to know and exercise your rights. So please don't think this is everything. There are books and books and books on this stuff. If you are on probation or parole, put everything I say, log it into your head, and don't use any of it till you're not on probation or parole. Okay? Probation or parole is a contract between you and the state that you're paroled from or probation from that says that in exchange for you not being in prison, you're going to waive some of these rights. So please don't go to the probation officer and say, hey, Stubbs told me you can't search my house. Yeah, no. You'll end up in handcuffs. So please don't do that. I want you to repeat after me. I hereby exercise my right to remain silent and consult my lawyer without exception. I do not consent to a search of any kind. I do not waive any of my constitutional rights. If I'm being detained, please tell me why. If I'm not being detained, I wish to leave. May I go? With that simple phrase, you have invoked every constitutional right you need to invoke if you are speaking to police officers and you don't want to speak to police officers. For whatever reason. Doesn't even mean you've done anything wrong. But because we're in this great nation, we have a Bill of Rights. We have the right to choose whether we want to speak to the government or not. And with that simple phrase, with that simple paragraph, you have now invoked every one of your constitutional rights. Dealing with the police is like buying a used car. You may think that you can do some research, and you can go in and get a great deal buying a used car. You may think you know everything about that car. You may think you know about the pricing and the market and the interest rates, and you're a mechanic and can really check it, right? But the fact of the matter is that when you go there every once in 3 to 5 to 10 years, whichever it is, that car salesman talks to people 5 times, 6 times, 8 times, 10 times a day. They are much more skilled in the art of the deal of the card than you are. It does not matter how much you study. It does not matter how much you know. It does not matter. The fact of the matter is that used car salesman has a definite advantage and knows what to say, how to do things to put you in the car and get you sometimes to forget or to waive some of the things that you know to be true from your research and your experience and your knowledge. Dealing with the police is the exact same thing. You are dealing with people whose job it is just to talk to others, and whose job it is to get others to waive their constitutional rights. And no matter how much you know, and no matter how much you practice, they are at an advantage with you because they do this every single day. So you need to know your rights, and you need to know the law, and you need to know it better than them. Because if you don't know it better than them, you're going to be at a distinct disadvantage. And my father told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Stephen, you're right. You may be right. Don't be unwise. So please, when you're using this information, you may be right. Don't be unwise. Treat others with respect and do things the right way." Now, you must know your rights before you can enforce your rights. Can I say that again? You must know your rights before you can enforce them. And you have to know the law. You have to. Today I'm going to speak on the First Amendment right to record law enforcement, very briefly, the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. Now, there's a Seventh Circuit case. The case is called Alvarez v. Connell. That the Seventh Circuit of this great United States of America established that we have a First Amendment freedom of press right to videotape police officers performing his or her official duties on public land. That is a First Amendment right. It was appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court denied cert. What did they say? They said, we're not going to mess with that, right? So in essence, the Supreme Court said that's okay. They didn't say it officially, but in essence, that's what they said. And once that was done, every law enforcement agency in this great United States was put on notice that it is your First Amendment freedom of press right to record police officers performing their official duties on public land. That's very important. I'm a big believer in just video recording. Now, don't be a dork. Don't be a jerk about it. Don't get in their face. Don't harass. That does nothing. But protect your rights. Videotape. Videotape a brother. Videotape somebody else. Because when that video camera is there, things are different. And if something goes awry, videotape doesn't lie. And so please, don't be a jerk about it, but you have the right to videotape a police officer performing their official duties on public land. If you are on private property, that private property owner has the right to tell you to put it away. And if you don't, you're breaking the law. But on public land, or unless the private property owner tells you not to, you have that right. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, I'm just going to read it. Says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized. That's the Fourth Amendment, right? I'm specifically going to talk about search and seizure of your person and when they can search you, when they can seize your property. Now, there's a standard in Nevada for search and seizure. It's NRS 171123, which says that that if the police have reasonable belief, that you have committing a crime, are now committing a crime, or will commit a crime, they have the right to detain you for a reasonable amount of time to effectuate the purpose of the stop, and a maximum of 60 minutes unless they arrest you. Okay. Reasonable amount of time to effectuate the purpose of the stop and not to exceed 60 minutes. What's interesting is when I first started in this and started to get to know you guys, the law enforcement, specifically Metro, had a practice of pulling people over and telling them they can keep them there for 60 minutes, and grilling them and pumping them for information. And that I identified as unconstitutional from the start. And so we started trying to educate, and we started trying to really let people know. And law enforcement wasn't exactly happy about it, but I even got, by March 2013, I even got Internal Affairs to put out a bulletin acquiescing to the fact that my interpretation is correct. A reasonable amount of time. If you were pulled over for a traffic stop, they can detain you for the purpose of that traffic stop. They are not allowed to continue the detention further to try to gather intelligence. They're not allowed to do that. Now, there's also a case called Heibel. Heibel v. 6th Judicial Court of Nevada. And it's a very important case. It went up to the United States Supreme Court, where the U.S. Supreme Court interpreted NRS 171123. And it's very important because it deals with the duty to identify. If you are being detained, you have a duty to identify yourself. And the police thought that meant one thing, citizens and defense attorneys thought it meant another. And so the Supreme Court looked at it, it was right after 9/11, looked at our statute and said, you have a duty, and it is constitutional for you to have this duty, to identify yourself, which means to give your legal name and nothing else. If you are being detained, the only thing the Constitution says you must do is give your legal name. There's an exception to this, to where if you are driving a vehicle, and you're talking to the police, they have a right to ask for your driver's license, and you must surrender it upon demand. If you're driving, you're supposed to have it on you, and if you don't, it's a misdemeanor if you do not give it to that officer. Well, what does that mean? That means that if you get pulled over in a car, and there's somebody driving, and the officer asks for his identification, and of course, it has to be him because he got pulled over while driving, and they ask for his identification, he has to give it. No one else in that car is forced to give up their identification. Period, exclamation point. That's what the United States Supreme Court has said. And if they're detaining the passengers for whatever reason, those passengers must state their legal name. However, they do not have to at any time give their identification. They just don't have to do it. Now, there's certain standards. Probable cause. Probable cause is an intrigue standard. There's reasonable suspicion, which means that the officer suspects that you did something wrong. They have to be able to articulate a specific fact to suspect that you did something wrong, anything wrong, right? And if that happens, then they can stop and talk to you. They can detain you, okay? But probable cause is the standard for arrest and a search warrant. Amendment searches, in general, police cannot search you unless you consent to that search. Now, this is where they're masters. This is where they can talk you into, most of the time, consenting in some way to the search. If you consent to the search. If they have a warrant, again, that's a probable cause standard. If they are securing their own safety, they are allowed to pat you down and make sure you're not, this is very limited, pat you down, make sure you don't have a weapon so they can disarm you. Then if they are arresting you, they get to search you. And then some emergency situations, the courts have said that's okay. There's some bomber, there's this, that, or the other. Police can search in those extremely rare emergency situations. Generally, that's the rule, okay? In your house, if you are in your house, police can only search your home if, number one, you consent. Can I come in? Sure, come on in. Wow, can I look around? Yeah. You just consented to a search of the house. You just consented. They can now put you away, and they got consent to search your house. If you give them consent, if they have a warrant, if there